Her blind date was loud about it, loud enough for the tables around them to hear. "I'm sorry, but I have to be honest with you. I don't date women your size. I figured you'd have lost some of it by now. From the photos. My mistake." The whole restaurant seemed to go quiet, and the woman across from him stared down at her plate and wished, the way she'd wished her entire life, that she could simply disappear through the floor. Then a chair scraped back 2 tables away. A man stood up, and when he spoke, his voice shook. Not with politeness, with something much older and much deeper. Because the billionaire who'd just risen to defend her was not a stranger. 18 years ago, this woman had been the only person on earth who was ever kind to him, and he had never, not for a single day of his life, forgotten her face. This is the story of Grace Lawson, and the night her oldest kindness came back to save her. Grace Lawson had spent her whole life being the nice one, not the pretty one, not the chosen one, the nice one, the dependable friend, the one who always remembered your birthday and showed up when your car broke down and listened for 3 hours while you cried about a man who would never have cried for 3 minutes over her. She was 35. She was a school counselor, and a wonderful one, at a big public high school, where she spent her days sitting with the lonely kids, the bullied ones, the ones who ate lunch alone in the library, because the cafeteria was a war zone. Grace had a gift for finding the kid no one else saw, and making them feel, for 45 minutes, like they mattered. She was a size 18, with a soft, round face, and the kindest eyes you ever saw. And the world had spent 35 years teaching her that kindness was the only thing she had to offer, and that it would never, ever, be enough to make anyone choose her. She'd lost count of the men who'd told her she was like a sister, who'd cried on her shoulder about other women, who'd said, "You're going to make some guy so happy someday," and then dated someone half her warmth and twice her thinness. Grace had been a bridesmaid 11 times. She'd never once been the bride. She made everyone else's life softer, and went home alone to a quiet apartment, and told herself she'd made her peace with it. She hadn't. Not really. But she'd stopped expecting anything different. So when her coworker Bethany begged her to go on one blind date, "He's a friend of my husband's. Preston. He's a lawyer. He's ambitious. He asked specifically for someone substantial. His word, I think he meant smart." Grace almost said no. She knew substantial wasn't going to mean what Bethany hoped it meant, but it had been a long, lonely winter. So she put on her good dress, a deep teal that made her feel almost lovely, and she went. She had no idea that the loneliest, kindest thing she'd ever done, 18 years ago, was about to walk back into her life and change everything. Preston Clark was a disappointment before the appetizers arrived. He was a corporate lawyer, sleek and impatient, the kind of man who checked his phone like it owed him money. And the moment Grace sat down, she watched his face do the math, the quick, cold recalculation she knew far too well, and come up short. He spent the first 20 minutes name-dropping. The firms he'd worked at, the important people he golfed with, the big tech client his firm was this close to landing. Holt Systems, he said, the company everyone wanted a piece of. He dropped the name Daniel Holt 3 times, like it was supposed to impress her. Like proximity to a billionaire made him one. And the whole time, Grace could feel him being embarrassed by her body, by the simple fact of sitting across from her in public. "So, Bethany tells me you're a school counselor," Preston said, in a tone that suggested she'd told him she collected toenails. "That's very selfless of you. Not exactly a power career, but somebody's got to do it, I suppose." He took a sip of wine. "Can I be honest with you, Grace? I'm a very visual person. Image matters in my world. The partners notice who you bring to events." His eyes flicked over her, unimpressed. "And I just don't think we're a fit. Physically, I figured I'd have a free dinner and a nice chat. But let's not pretend there's chemistry here." Grace set down her fork. She'd absorbed 100 versions of this, but something about the casual cruelty of it, the "I figured I'd have a free dinner," landed wrong tonight. "Let me make sure I understand," Grace said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "You agreed to a date with a woman you had no intention of being kind to. You came for a free meal and the chance to feel superior. And now you're explaining, out loud, in a nice restaurant, that I'm not decorative enough for your law firm parties." She tilted her head. "Preston, I sit with bullied 14-year-olds for a living. I know exactly what it sounds like when someone's cruelty is just fear in a nicer suit. You're not too good for me. You're just scared of anyone who'd see through you." She reached for her purse. "I'll let you enjoy your free dinner alone." But Preston, stung, wasn't done. He wanted the last word, the way small men always do, and he said it loud, loud enough for the tables around them to hear. "Oh, please, see through me?" He laughed, mean and sharp. "Honey, let's be real. Women like you don't get to lecture men like me. I don't date women your size. I figured you'd have lost some of it by now, from the photos. My mistake. Sit down, finish your bread, and be grateful a man like me even showed up." The whole restaurant went quiet, and Grace Lawson, 35 years old, the nice one, the kind one, the one who'd never been chosen, felt herself start to shrink, the way she'd shrunk her whole life. Then a chair scraped back 2 tables away. A man stood up. He was tall, broad-shouldered, beautifully dressed, with dark hair and a quiet, serious face. And he crossed the floor with a kind of controlled stillness, like a man holding something powerful, very carefully. And he stopped beside their table and looked down at Preston. "Stand up," the man said quietly. Preston blinked. "Excuse me, who the hell are—" "I said stand up." The man's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You just told a woman to be grateful you showed up. So I'd like you to be standing when I tell you what I think of that." Something in his tone got Preston to his feet. "I've been sitting right there for 20 minutes, the man said, "listening to you humiliate the kindest-looking person in this restaurant for the crime of not being decorative enough for you. And I have to tell you, Preston, I've spent my whole life around men like you. Men who think cruelty is the same as strength. It isn't. Cruelty is what people reach for when they've got nothing real to offer." His jaw tightened. "You name-dropped Holt Systems 3 times tonight. You said your firm was this close to landing the account." A cold pause. "I'm Daniel Holt. It's my company. And I promise you, after tonight, your firm will not be getting within a mile of it. You've just had the most expensive free dinner of your life." The blood drained out of Preston Clark's face. The whole restaurant was watching now. And Daniel Holt, Billionaire, the man Preston had been bragging about all night, turned away from him entirely, like he'd already forgotten he existed, and looked at Grace. And something happened in his face. Something cracked open. His cold, controlled stillness wavered, and underneath it was something raw and stunned and almost frightened. "Grace," he said, very quietly, like the name hurt. "Grace Lawson?" Grace stared up at this powerful stranger, completely lost. "I'm sorry," she said. Do I know you?" The man's eyes filled. An actual billionaire, in the middle of a restaurant, with tears standing in his eyes. "You did once," he said. "A long time ago, when it mattered more than anything in the world." He swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. You don't recognize me. There's no reason you would. I've changed a lot." He pulled out the empty chair Preston had abandoned, but he didn't sit. He just rested his hands on the back of it. Could I buy you dinner? A real one. I have 18 years of things I've wanted to say to you, and I never thought I'd get the chance." And Grace, baffled and shaken and strangely, deeply moved, said yes. Preston Clark had already fled. They never saw him again. Daniel ordered her dinner brought back, kept warm. And then he sat across from her, this serious, successful man, and he looked at her, like she was a miracle he'd stopped believing in. "You really don't know me," he said softly. It wasn't a question. "I'm sorry," Grace said. "I feel like I should. There's something." She shook her head. "But I don't." "Westbrook High," Daniel said. 18 years ago. You were a junior. I was a sophomore." He took a breath. "Back then, my name was Danny Holt, and I was the fattest, loneliest, most bullied kid in that entire school." Grace went very still. "Danny," she whispered. And then, slowly, she saw it. Buried under the years, and the confidence, and the expensive suit, the eyes. The same gentle, frightened eyes she remembered, on a heavy, miserable boy who used to eat lunch alone in the corner of the library because the cafeteria wasn't safe for him. "Oh my God, Danny Holt. You remember," he breathed. "Of course I remember." Grace's own eyes were filling now. They were awful to you. The things they'd do. I remember you sitting in the library, and..." She stopped. "I remember sitting with you. Every day," Daniel said. His voice was unsteady. "For an entire year. You found me eating alone in the library, Grace. A junior. Pretty. Popular enough to sit anywhere you wanted. And you put your tray down across from a fat, miserable sophomore that the whole school treated like garbage, and you said," his voice broke, "you said, 'This seat taken? I hate the cafeteria too.' And you came back the next day, and the next. For a whole year, you were the only person in that building who treated me like a human being. You didn't do it for credit. You didn't do it where anyone could see. You did it because that's just who you are." Grace was crying now, openly. "Danny, I didn't. That was just lunch. I didn't think it was." "It was everything," Daniel said fiercely. "It was the only kindness I had." "My home was falling apart. My dad lost his job. My parents were screaming every night. And school was a nightmare. And the only 45 minutes of my day that didn't hurt were the ones in that library with you." He wiped his eyes. A billionaire crying in a restaurant and not caring who saw. "And then, my family moved away that summer. We just vanished. I never got to say goodbye. I never got to tell you what you'd done for me." He looked at her. "Grace, you have no idea. The whole reason I survived that year, the whole reason I believed I might be worth something someday, was a girl who sat with me in a library and never once made me feel like a project. I built my entire life on the proof you gave me. The proof that I was a person worth being kind to. The restaurant, the city, the 18 years, all of it fell away." "You changed so much," Grace said softly. "On the outside," Daniel agreed. "I grew up. I found my feet. I built a company out of nothing, and it got big, fast, and the world started treating me very differently than it did when I was the fat kid in the library." His jaw tightened, and I never forgot for 1 second that none of it was real. That the only person who'd ever been kind to me when I had nothing, when I was at my absolute lowest, exactly as I was you. The world only loves me now that I'm successful. You loved me when I was nobody. That's the difference I've spent 18 years trying to find again, and I never could." He looked at her, and his voice dropped. "Until I walked into a restaurant tonight and heard a man humiliating a woman for her body. And I stood up to stop it. And it was you." Grace Lawson sat across from the boy she'd once been kind to, now grown into a man who'd never forgotten, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very, very long time. She felt seen. What grew between them over the following weeks should have been simple. It wasn't. Daniel pursued her with a sincerity that took her breath away. He took her to dinners, real ones, where someone brought her the water. He sent flowers to the school, which scandalized the front office and delighted the kids. He sat in on her after-school program, this Billionaire, and talked to the lonely teenagers about the year a girl named Grace sat with him in a library, and Grace watched 20 bullied kids sit up straighter and fell a little more in love with him every time. And that was the problem. She was falling in love, and she was terrified. Because the more wonderful Daniel was, the louder the old voice got. The one that said, "He's a billionaire. He could have anyone. Why would he choose you?" But there was a deeper fear underneath it, and it was the one that finally cracked her open one night, on the steps of her building, when Daniel told her he was falling for her. "You're not in love with me, Danny," she said, her voice shaking. "You're in love with her, the girl in the library, the 17-year-old who was kind to you on the worst year of your life. You've built her up in your head for 18 years into some kind of saint." Tears spilled over. "And I'm not her. I'm 35, and I'm tired, and I've been a bridesmaid 11 times, and a bride never, and I'm lonely, Danny, in a way that isn't pretty or saintly at all. You're going to keep looking at me and seeing the girl who saved you, and one day you're going to realize the real me can't live up to the memory, and you'll be disappointed, and I can't survive that. I'd rather lose you now than lose you to a memory I can't compete with." And she went inside and closed the door and left Daniel Holt standing alone on her steps. She didn't hear from him for 2 days, but Daniel Holt had not spent 18 years finding her again to lose her over a ghost. On the 3rd day, he showed up at her school. Not with flowers this time. He asked the front office, very seriously, if he could speak with the counselor. And when Grace came out, baffled, he was standing in the hallway holding a cafeteria tray, a school cafeteria tray, with a sad little carton of milk and a sandwich on it. "Daniel, what are you—" "Sit with me," he said. "There's an empty table over there. The cafeteria's loud and I hate it." His eyes were steady. "Isn't that how this works?" Grace's breath caught. They sat. At an empty cafeteria table, a billionaire and a counselor, and a sad little lunch tray, while teenagers streamed past gawking. "You think I'm in love with a memory," Daniel said quietly. "So let me tell you about the woman I'm actually in love with. Not the 17-year-old, the one sitting in front of me right now." He set down the milk. "I'm in love with a 35-year-old woman who's tired, because she gives every bit of herself to broken kids all day and saves nothing for herself. I'm in love with a woman who's been a bridesmaid 11 times and was generous and kind at every single wedding, even though it broke her heart a little each time. I'm in love with a woman who's lonely, really lonely, in the way that isn't pretty, and who is still, somehow, the kindest person I've ever met." He took her hand across the tray. "I don't love a saint, Grace. Saints are easy to love. I love the real, tired, lonely, magnificent woman who told a corporate lawyer that his cruelty was just fear, in a nicer suit, in a restaurant, in front of everyone, before she knew I was anyone at all." His voice roughened. "You think you can't compete with a memory?" "Grace, the memory was never as good as you actually are. I didn't come back for the girl in the library. I came back for you. And I'd very much like to stop eating lunch alone. For good." Grace Lawson looked at this man, sitting at a cafeteria table with a sad little tray, having heard every single one of her ugliest fears, and answered them one by one. "This seat taken?" Daniel asked softly. The same words. Turned around at last. And Grace, the nice one, the kind one, the one who was finally, after 35 years, being chosen, started to laugh through her tears. "No," she whispered. "It's not taken. It's yours. It's been yours since the library, I think. I just didn't know it yet." And Daniel Holt kissed the woman who'd saved him, in a high school cafeteria, in front of 100 cheering teenagers, 18 years after she first sat down across from a lonely boy and made him believe he mattered. The thing with Preston Clark resolved itself the way these things do. His firm, it turned out, really had been counting on the Holt Systems account to make several careers, Preston's chief among them. That account went elsewhere, with a quiet word from Daniel about exactly why. Preston's star, which he'd been so sure was rising, quietly stopped rising at all. He'd spent his whole life climbing by stepping on people he thought couldn't hurt him. He'd stepped on the wrong one. Grace and Daniel were married the following autumn. She kept her job. He wouldn't have dreamed of asking her to give up the kids who needed her. Instead, he did something better. He funded a foundation, with Grace running it, dedicated to the lonely kids in schools everywhere. The ones eating lunch alone in libraries. They put counselors in schools that couldn't afford them. They trained teachers to spot the kid in the corner. And the whole thing was built on one simple idea, the one a 17-year-old girl had proven to a miserable boy 18 years before, that one person being kind can save a whole life. She never lost the weight Preston had sneered about. She never needed to. Daniel looked at her, every single day, like she was the most beautiful thing the world had ever made. Because to him, she was, and always had been, exactly as she was. One evening, long after, Daniel found his wife in her home office, reading a letter from a kid their foundation had helped. A heavy, bullied 14-year-old who'd written to say a counselor had started sitting with him at lunch, and that it was the first time school hadn't hurt. She was crying. The good kind. "What's that look?" Daniel asked, though he knew. "Just thinking," Grace said, "about a boy in a library." She looked up at him, and how I had no idea, when I sat down, that I was saving the love of my life. "You weren't just saving me," Daniel said, pulling her up into his arms. "You were proving something to me, that I spent 18 years too scared to believe. That the right person doesn't love you for being decorative, or thin, or impressive." He kissed her forehead. "They love you for being kind, when no one's watching. They love you exactly as you are. You taught me that at a library table when we were kids, and I've spent every day since trying to be worthy of the lesson." And Grace Lawson, counselor, wife, the woman who was always the nice one, and finally got to be the chosen one too, leaned into the boy she'd once saved, who'd grown up and come back to save her right back. And she understood, at last, the things she'd told 100 lonely kids and never once believed about herself. She was never just the nice one. She was never the consolation, the friend, the one who makes everyone else's life softer and goes home alone. She was the prize. She always had been. She'd just been waiting for the one person who'd been paying attention all along. So that's the story of how a single act of kindness, 18 years in the past, came back to save the woman who gave it, and how the lonely boy in the library grew up into the man who finally chose her. Preston spent his whole life climbing on the backs of people he thought didn't matter, and he never understood that the woman he humiliated had once shaped a billionaire's entire soul with nothing but a lunch tray and a kind word. Grace proved that the smallest kindness, given freely when no one is watching, is the most powerful thing a person can do, because you never, ever know whose whole life you might be saving. Did Daniel's reveal give you chills? Did that cafeteria moment bring a tear to your eye? If you believe the kindest people deserve to be the chosen ones, go ahead and tap that like button. Share this story with someone who was always the nice one. And subscribe to Elena Love Stories and ring that bell. Because here, the person the world overlooks always, always gets the ending they deserve. Now tell me down in the comments, was there ever a kid you were kind to, or one who was kind to you, that you never forgot?